I'm Daniel Blackford. I'm a threat researcher here at Proofpoint, going on 3 years now. What that means is that I'm, looking through massive amounts of mail flow data on a regular basis to try to identify, various actor activities, their TTPs, their infrastructure, and track them over time to note how those things change, and then kind of surface the information and insights about them to either customers directly through products or through presentations like this one. So what I have for you today is first just kind of like some high level quick trends about the landscape very broadly, and then a bit of a deeper dive into two of the attack types that are I think top of mind this year, both kind of in terms of how widespread they are, but also monetary losses. So we're going to take a deeper look at ransomware and BEC. I think the first thing to realize is that email is the most prevalent vector by which a breach happens, right? So according to Verizon with their annual, data breach investigation reports, email accounts for 94% of the initial breach, and I think it's something like 97% of breaches actually involve no technical exploit. So really, the idea is that humans are kind of the soft target in a defensive posture, and so I don't think it really makes sense anymore to identify an attack as kind of like a social engineering attack. Really, it's a question of what type of social engineering was used in any given attack to get someone to click, whether that's a link or enable macros, or to give some type of information away, or to initiate a transfer of funds or data. So that's where we start. But if we're talking about threats coming in through email, typically that's going to either be a URL-based threat or an attachment-based threat. As we'll see on the next slide, URL threats are far more common by an order of magnitude. But it's about, in 2020, it was about 60% of all of our campaigned message volume related to credential phishing specifically. And I think, there could be a dismissive mindset toward phishing, right? We know that we need to train our users on it, but I think maybe can be less technically interesting than these stories about, massive companies getting ransomed. But at the end of the day, getting credentials that allow the compromise of accounts, sits in a place in the ecosystem that facilitates all other types of attacks. So it's not just like, great, you were able to log into my account. It's you were able to log into my account, and now you can send emails that pass authentication, with company-specific branded documents, et cetera. So credential phishing, massively important, and that is far and away the majority of malicious emails. But if we're looking at URLs and getting a user to click in a link, we also see a ton of hosted documents. Maybe some compressed downloaders. So there's a piece of software that serves as kind of an intermediary stage to download something after that. And more, what we're seeing is that the URLs used are legitimate hosting services. So things like Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive, et cetera. But, you can't necessarily blacklist these services. There are legitimate business use cases, and it's very easy to generate unique URLs per email. Doing something like reputation-based condemnation on a known URL becomes less effective when every single email, maybe hundreds of thousands in a single day going out, has its own unique URL. We're also seeing probably for the past year and a half now, use of traffic distribution systems. Kaitaro is a really popular one, but we've seen a couple of others. And this is another legitimate service that serves as like a middleman router of traffic. So, depending on who clicks the link, whether they're on mobile or on a desktop, whether they're on various operating systems, they're coming out of specific geographies in terms of the IPs that they're connecting with, you hit the central hub and then get redirected to different landing pages. And actually what we've seen is that exploit kits, which kind of fell off out of use, out of favor in 2016, have kind of made a mini resurgence because for the actors using this particular type of attack, they can identify which browsers specifically might be vulnerable to exploit, and then when a user that's browsing with that browser hits the TDS, they can direct them to the specific exploit kit that can make use of that. So that's an interesting one that's kind of come back. As I said before, URLs are just from a pure volume perspective, completely outshine attachments. And I think, that's largely due to kind of old models where it was attachments that were being sent out. And as defenders, we built technologies and training to defend against that. And also, like I said, it's a lot easier to just generate unique URLs than it is necessarily to generate unique attachments. So this is your standard phishing page. We see millions of these types of threats every single day, and they're very often themed around shipping, around transportation of goods, any type of mailing service is going to be used. We also see invoices and resumes, types of content that you would expect to get regular updates on. So like tracking information or that type of thing. In this particular case, it's a well-known international shipper, and on the left, you have the email itself. You click the link, it takes you to the landing page on the right, where again, the branding is quite good. And they're, in this particular case, looking for payment information to get your package released, right? And in the email, they call for $199 US. On the web page, it's 199 euro. So we can assume probably that they're targeting different geographical regions with some of the same content, and just kind of slipped up there a little bit. But we should point out that notification center delivatemp.blogspot.com is probably not an official domain used by this particular organization. So maybe we would have a hint there that this is actually a phish. Otherwise, it's pretty well branded. So then the other type of, the most common type of attack is going to involve an attachment in the actual email, right? And so, again, we see the legitimate business use cases be the things that dominate. So, Microsoft Office documents, Word and Excel, PDFs, these type of things. There's not a way from a policy standpoint really to be like, sorry, you just can't send Excel documents back and forth. And the actors know this, right? That's why it's effective. And so the documents tend to have macros in them. When you click that, enable macros button, that one click is really all it takes for the software to reach out to the internet, pull down a payload. Some interesting trends here that we've seen, just widespread adoption of password protected files. So when you zip a file, add a password to it, what that does is encrypt it. That means that automated detection capabilities that might scan an email or put it in a sandbox as soon as it comes in isn't going to be able to determine the contents of that archive unless the password is actually put in. So now you're adding a layer of like, well, if we're trying to detect this in an automated fashion, we have to extract the password from the message body before we can see what they're actually trying to send around. Again, though, it's generally speaking just attachments that have a legitimate business use case. HTML is really widely used, and so what this is it's a file of the code of a web page, and basically every modern browser can render this locally. So you don't actually even technically need an active internet connection. It's not going to reach out to the actual page where it was necessarily originally hosted when you open it. But so here we have social engineering around a COVID vaccination appointment. So to avoid queue, kindly download the attachment, sign in and view your schedule and date and important information. They've got the nice CDC logo on there. And then when you open the HTML attachment, it's got almost what looks to be kind of like Google-based branding, like very streamlined. They say there's a confidential document, you view the document, but before you can get the document, you have to enter an email account, right? So this is a credential phish. Also with, as far as attachments are concerned, I mentioned the password protected stuff. Actors are kind of going a step further recently. We saw this earlier this year. Instead of having the password just as text, which might be a little bit easier to extract if we're trying to build some automated detection, they're now using things like CAPTCHA graphics, or in some cases, the entire body of the email is an image. So now, again, they're adding another layer where you have to have some kind of image processing software to be able to determine, the password to get into the encrypted archive. So those are just some of the things that we've seen in the last year or so. Now I kind of want to take a deeper dive into two specific topics. The first being ransomware, just because we know anecdotally that kind of across the board industries are getting crushed. Again, going back to the Verizon DBIR, they said it was up 100% last year. I've seen other vendors with visibility into the endpoint talking, 200 to 300% increases. So, this is a topic that is top of mind for a lot of people right now. So what is it? It's technically not even really that interesting, right? Basically, you get, when the ransomware is executed on your system, it traverses your files and runs an encryption algorithm over them. So now they're no longer accessible. And you'll get a ransom note on your desktop, sometimes in an email, sometimes in every single folder where they encrypted a file. But it looks something like this. All your documents, photos, databases, and other important files have been encrypted. You're not able to decrypt it. If you want your files back, go to our website here. Here's your unique ID. So you follow that to their website, very often hosted on Tor network, like a .onion site. And there is a unique identifier for you. In this particular case, they're asking for $800 US. So it's pretty low ransom because, we've seen ones this year that are in the multiple millions. So this is a very reasonable ransom request from a threat actor. They want you to pay it within 8 hours. As you can see, they provide a Bitcoin wallet in this case to make the payment to. It's generally always going to be in form of cryptocurrency. I don't think I've seen any ransomware asking for a check payment or anything like that. But it's not always Bitcoin. It can be other types too. Monero maybe being the second most common. Typically speaking, they're asking for Bitcoin though. You pay them, they give you the decryptor, you run the decryptor over your files, and you have your files back. That is the general idea of ransomware. But if we look at the actual a map of our volume over time, I think a conceptual problem arises, right? So if we go back to 2017, we saw specific actors like TA505, sending between 10 and 12 million attachments out in a single day. They were distributing ransomwares like Blocky and Globe Imposter, and they were just spraying and praying these out to as many people as they could possibly hit, thinking that the best way to monetize would be to just hit as many systems as possible. Some number of those people are going to pay, and that's how we're going to make our money here. But as we move to the right side of the graph, we see that the volume has actually gone down, and that little hill in the middle of 2020 is a few million messages. And so, there are a lot of cases of tens of thousands of messages that won't even show up on the graph here, basically. But how do we reconcile this idea that the ransomware as a first stage payload just kind of being sent out by actors has dropped off, while at the same time we know that everyone's getting hit with it, right? Like the actual instances of it breaching people or compromising people have increased. How do we reconcile that? Well, we have to understand that the model has fundamentally changed. Actors are no longer just spraying out ransomware attachments randomly. It's much more organized. And so what is essentially what's happened is that the ransomware operators have partnered with other criminal actors, or in some cases, other criminal actors have developed their own ransomware to serve as this end game. So if we see the Trick, Drydex, IceID here, these are classic banking Trojans, also botnets. That's their function was to inject into a banking session and steal credentials, maybe in some cases issue an automatic transfer from one account to another. But it turns out that the ransomware game is so much more lucrative that they have all pivoted to use some ransomware as their end step. So under each of these botnets, we also see some TA numbers. Those are different threat actors that are distributing that botnet on behalf of the botnet's operators, their central controller. So we have this, robust ecosystem of criminal connections where, we have some people who are spamming out the campaigns, and we have some people who are maintaining the botnets, and we have some people who are executing the ransomware. But the main takeaway here is that instead of just sending out the ransomware, there's now a first stage that is going to allow some reconnaissance to find a juicy target, a target that's likely to pay, maybe because they find financials, or they know that they have cyber insurance, or they just in general feel like they're in an industry maybe where they can put pressure on them. And in those particular cases, then the ransomware will be selectively deployed. I don't want you to think that there's some exclusive connection in all of these cases between the botnet and the ransomware. It's true in some cases. For example, with the Trick, for 2 years, it was the only thing that led to a Ryuk infection. And then in, I think, October of last year, we saw Bozzleloader drop it, but there might be a connection between Bozzleloader and the Trick. Regardless, there are other cases where, the ransomware that's being used changes over time, or multiple botnets might lead to the same ransomware. This just kind of speaks to the inter-criminal relationship that these actors have developed. And so if we take it from that view that the ransomware isn't the first thing that's being sent out, that the ransomware is something that's going to come down the line as a secondary or tertiary payload, then we start to realize where the volume actually was. And so in 2020, I think we observed 48 million messages that were for a malware that is known to lead to a ransomware infection. It's not that all of them would 100% lead to ransomware. It's that this was the precursor stage and the actor was doing reconnaissance. And so, 48 million messages, quite a lot. And so here's an example of just one of those campaigns. And so this is for Bozzleloader. And so the email says that your subscription to our streaming service, your free trial is over. You're about to start getting charged $39.99 per month. And if you have questions, you need to contact us. And there are two things to say here. The first is that we saw a lot of actors pivot to use material along these lines because, at the time where things maybe started to look a little more normal before Delta variant got out of control, a lot of people were canceling services that they were using for entertainment while they were quarantined in their homes for months, right? So I think there was a wave of canceling services like these, and the actors picked up on that. The other thing to note here is that there is no actual URL, there is no attachment. Where's the threat? Well, that phone number is actually live, and the actors have a call center on the other side and are expecting intended victims to call in. And when they do, the victims the actors tell the victim where to go. They give them a URL to go to. And so in this particular case, it's for a movie streaming site, Bravo Movies. This is not a real service. All of this is professionally designed by the actors themselves. It's not like they just ripped this code from some legitimate service and spoofed it. They created this. They added movies with runtimes and ratings and told you that you could stream it in 4K resolution. I personally would watch The Dog Wolf. I'll watch anything with dogs in it. So this is just like incredibly well designed. And the threat actor that you're on the phone with is walking you through the pages. Where do you scroll? Where do you click? Eventually you get to the FAQ page and then to the subscription page that shows correct. You're about to get charged $39.99 per month. And when you click cancel it actually downloads an Excel file. And when you enable macros on that, you get Bottleloader, which is known to lead to both Ryuk and Conti ransomware. So very involved, but even in this case, they still require that a user, click to enable macros after they download the document, and it still is going to install Bottleloader, which in and of itself is not ransomware, right? It's like, we get this on your system. Now we can determine whether or not ransomware, if you're an appropriate target for ransomware. And so that's what we'll look at here. So on the left, we have a threat actor, got the internet in the middle, and then we have 3 people from any given organization on the right, a VP of marketing, an HR representative, and a server admin. And so the threat actor sends out their document. Maybe it's via the campaign that we just looked at, and you downloaded it yourself. Oftentimes, though, it's just going to be attached directly to an email, or you click a URL and it pulls down the document. But the VP of marketing and HR both click to enable macros. The server admin knows better. But when those 2 personnel click, it reaches out to the internet and pulls down the first stage payload. So this is the first piece of malware that's actually being installed on the machine. And this is Bottleloader, which is what we just looked at. Now, Bottleloader surveys these machines, gives details about the operating system and the network and the hardware configuration, and sends that system information back to the threat actor. Now, this is where we introduce the concept of dwell time. So we call dwell time the time between this initial compromise and some follow-on action taken by the actor. What comes next. And if we go back 2 years when we saw this model kind of start to evolve, it was very common to see dwell times of weeks to months. The systems were compromised, just kind of sitting there for a while before the actor did something with them. Now their model is very streamlined, and we're seeing dwell times as short as hours. I think 4 hours is very regular. 2 hours has happened on multiple occasions. So the actors have gotten better at figuring out exactly who they want to infect. So the actor here sees that they have some system information, and they send a secondary payload. In this case, that is Cobalt Strike. It is a legitimate program that you can license. It is for red teamers, penetration testing peeps who will use it to emulate, to act like they're a bad guy and show you where in your network you might be vulnerable, or where in your systems you're vulnerable. But it's also a favorite tool of actors. There's a good organization called DFIR, they're forensics investigators, and they tweeted earlier this year that for every single ransomware infection across multiple variants that they investigated this year, Cobalt Strike always predated it. So now we have 2 pieces of malware on the system and still no ransomware. But the strength of Cobalt Strike is that it can move laterally through networks. It can elevate privileges. It can scrape and harvest credentials. And so by virtue of Cobalt Strike being on these other machines, the threat actor is able to pivot and actually compromise the server administrator's machine. And so now by compromising that server admin and probably elevating privileges, the threat actor can then pivot through the entire network. And when they capture some resource like a domain controller or some other resource, they can then push the ransomware to every system on the network, as opposed to just sending out a ton of attachments and hoping that it ends up on a high value target. This is basically the current ransomware model for all of these high profile attacks. So that brings us to business email compromise, which maybe seems a little less sexy than ransomware, but as we'll see in a moment, is far more damaging. So what is BEC, or business email compromise? It's fraud through email, and it's particularly interesting because as I said before, most of these threats are either going to be URL based, they're going to be attachment based. In the case of BEC, there generally is neither of those, right? It starts as benign conversation, and then some request for action is made. That could be after trading conversation back and forth through multiple emails. Could be after establishing a rapport. But often, what you see is that there's some sense of urgency around it. The threat actors are often attempting to impersonate someone in a position of power. And so in this case, Elizabeth Moody, Director of Operations, are you available? Hope you're having a fine day. But if you look at the actual email address, yeem8910@gmail.com is probably not Elizabeth Moody, not an official business email. And so, same thing here. It's like Proton Mail. It's probably should be a clue that something's not right. But in this particular case, they're asking to make a Bitcoin transfer to a vendor, but within 48 hours. So very, very frequently, you'll see things like, I'm in a meeting right now and I can't do this. I need you to do it as quickly as possible. And so by virtue of, kind of leveraging the fact that it might be impersonating an executive, leveraging the fact that the action being requested is time sensitive, it defeats, maybe the instinctual defenses that we've built up through training or being exposed to these types of things. So this is the real kicker, I think, with BEC. The losses continue to increase. In fact, last year, financial loss from BEC was 66 times worse than ransomware in terms of what was reported in losses. And that accounts for 44% of all monetary loss by malicious cybercrime last year. We can always assume that actual losses are higher than what is reported here. But, because there aren't cool, techniques or ransom notes with graphics on them, like that one that I showed you earlier. They have another page where they have like Harry Potter figures, like Dumbledore, like it's like there's nothing cool about an email that just says, hey, I'm in a meeting, can you make this transfer real fast? But because of that, because it's innocuous and benign, it's very difficult to detect. And it's also in some cases reasonable requests. And that's why it's being very effective. So we're looking for new ways to combat that, to think about and frame the problem. So some colleagues of mine have drummed up this kind of new taxonomy framework where the BEC actors are going to incorporate, something from each of these three tiers or levels. So they're going to impersonate someone. That could be one of your employees. It could be a supplier or a vendor in your chain, or it could be unknown. We definitely have seen cases of actors, for example, using form emails to ask a question or make a request as just the initial lead-in. You start that conversation. And then moving down into the next level, they're going to impersonate them in some way, right? So in the previous example, Elizabeth Moody, it said Elizabeth Moody, the email address wasn't actually the same. So, that was a display name spoof. they might create a lookalike domain to the company that they're attempting to impersonate. And so, you have to be very careful to notice that it looks similar, but it's not exactly the same. Or for example, reply to manipulation, they have spoofed the email address, and then when you click reply to, it's actually going somewhere else. It's also true that they might actually have taken over an account, in which case it's going to pass things like SPF and DMARC. Like that's way more dangerous when the email that's asking you to take some action comes from inside your company, and maybe even from a trusted person in your chain of command. But this is the type of attack that we see very regularly. So the threat actor emails, it says, "Hey, I need to update my direct deposit information." HR representative says, "Sure, send me your new information." They update it, and then the next time direct deposit hits, it goes into the threat actor's account instead of the cyber criminal, or instead of the illegitimate employee's account. This happens super frequently. There's also the case too, again, as I was saying, where the account itself is taken over, and that's what happened here. A supplier was compromised, and by virtue of having access to that supplier's inbox, the threat actor could see on what cadence the invoices were sent, have the full actual template, know who specifically in the other organization was receiving them and making the payments, and all they did was change the banking information at the bottom of the invoice, basically, and started immediately collecting. So this is the last thing I want to talk about with BEC in terms of what we're seeing kind of evolve with it, right? It's already very difficult to detect, but now we're starting to see multi-vector attacks. So TA 2356 is a threat actor that we track, and they have started incorporating malware, keyloggers, stealers, anything to scrape credentials from accounts first, and then incorporating that into a BEC attack down the line. So they take those accounts and actually take over the accounts. Now they're no longer doing spoofing where an iCheck might catch it. They have the actual accounts compromised, as we've seen. So this landscape continues to evolve and be a challenge point in terms of detection. And so that is what I have for you today.